My teacher humiliated me in class for saying I believe in two genders, calling me a bigot. I recorded her outburst and sued the school. That was 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, she showed up at my door, crying and apologizing. All right, so this whole mess started about a month ago in my gender studies class at community college. I know. Why would I even take that class if I wasn't going to drink the Kool-Aid, right? Honestly, I needed the credits and figured I could keep my mouth shut for 1 semester. Boy, was I wrong. The teacher, let's call her Ms. Peterson, was this super intense lady in her 40s who wore those chunky glasses and had that whole I'm gonna change the world one PowerPoint at a time vibe. For real, she'd get so worked up during lectures that she'd pace around like she was giving a TED Talk to a packed auditorium instead of teaching 20 sleepy college kids at 8 a.m. For the first few weeks, I kept my head down, took notes, nodded along, did my assignments. The whole deal was basically what you'd expect. Discussions about gender being a social construct, how traditional views are outdated, all that jazz. I mean, I get it. People should be able to live their lives however makes them happy. No cap, I'm not trying to tell anyone how to exist. But when it came to my own beliefs, that's where things got messy. The breaking point came during a class discussion about biological sex versus gender identity. Ms. Peterson was going hard on how the idea of only two genders was basically ancient history, and she asked the class to share their thoughts. Most kids were just agreeing with whatever she said, probably smart, looking back on it. But then she called on me directly, pointed right at me and said, "What's your perspective on this?" And man, I should have just said something safe and moved on. Instead, I cleared my throat and said, "I respect everyone's right to identify however they want, but personally, I believe there are two biological genders." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that cheap carpet. Ms. Peterson's face went from confused to straight up angry in about 2 seconds flat. "Excuse me?" she said, and her voice had this edge to it that made everyone sit up straighter. I tried to backtrack a little. I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. I just think there's a difference between biological sex and how people choose to identify. And personally, she cut me off right there. Personally? Her voice was getting louder with each word. Your personal beliefs are rooted in bigotry and ignorance. This kind of thinking is exactly what's wrong with our society. The whole class was staring at me now, and I felt my face getting hot. But she wasn't done. Students like you come into my classroom thinking you can spread your narrow-minded views and disguise them as personal beliefs. Well, let me tell you something. Bigotry isn't a belief system. It's a choice to remain ignorant. At this point, I'm sitting there like a deer in headlights while she's basically roasting me in front of everyone. Some of the other students were looking uncomfortable, but nobody was saying anything. Your so-called beliefs contribute to the marginalization and harm of vulnerable communities, she continued, really getting into it now. And frankly, I'm disappointed that someone with such backward thinking would even enroll in this course. Update. Holy cow, this post blew up way more than I expected. Thanks for all the support, everyone. I'm getting tons of messages asking what happened next, so let me continue. Also, some people are asking if I really recorded everything. Yeah, I did, and it gets pretty intense from here. Should I post about what the school administration said when they heard the recording? That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not obvious or anything, just set it on my desk like I was checking the time. My hands were shaking, but I knew I needed proof of what was happening. Ms. Peterson was still going off. This is exactly the kind of mentality that leads to discrimination and violence against transgender individuals. You're sitting here, comfortable in your privilege, spouting off these harmful ideas like they're facts. I tried one more time to defend myself. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I literally said I respect everyone's right to identify however we want. I was just sharing my own view when you asked. Your view is wrong, she practically shouted. And the fact that you're doubling down on it shows exactly the kind of person you are. This is my classroom, and I will not tolerate hate speech, disguised as personal opinion. The girl next to me actually scooted her chair away like whatever I had was contagious. Another student was recording with her phone too, but I'm pretty sure she was on Ms. Peterson's side. Maybe you should consider whether this class is right for you, Ms. Peterson said, crossing her arms, because if you're not willing to examine your prejudices and grow as a person, you're just wasting everyone's time. The rest of the class period was brutal. She kept making little comments and giving me these looks. When she handed back our previous assignments, she practically threw mine on my desk. Got a C- on a paper I thought was pretty solid, with a note that said lacks critical thinking and cultural awareness. After class, I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot and just stared at the recording on my phone. 15 minutes of pure gold. Well, pure nightmare, but you know what I mean. My hands were still shaking as I replayed parts of it. That afternoon, I drove straight to my dad's house. He's this former Navy guy who taught me that sometimes you gotta stand up for yourself, even when it's scary. When I showed him the recording, his face went through about 6 different expressions. "Kiddo, this is straight-up harassment," he said, rewinding to the part where she called me a bigot. "You can't let people treat you like this, especially not someone who's supposed to be educating you." We spent the next few hours researching my options. Turns out, students have rights too. Who knew? My dad helped me write up a formal complaint to the school, and we made copies of the recording. The next Monday, instead of going to class, I went to the dean's office. The secretary, this sweet older lady named Mrs. Rodriguez, could tell I was nervous. "Honey, what's got you so worked up?" she asked. When I explained the situation and played the recording, her eyes went wide. "Oh my," she kept saying. "Oh my goodness." Dean Williams, this tall guy with a gray beard, listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When it was over, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "This is concerning," he said finally. "Very concerning. I'm going to need to investigate this immediately." They scheduled a meeting for later that week with me, my dad, Ms. Peterson, and some higher-ups from the district. In the meantime, they moved me to a different section of the same class with a different teacher. The new teacher, Mr. Garcia, was way more chill. He actually encouraged different viewpoints and managed discussions without making anyone feel attacked. Funny how that works. The big meeting was intense. Ms. Peterson showed up with a union rep, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. When they played the recording, she kept trying to interrupt and explain her side, but the audio spoke for itself. "I was trying to educate her," she kept saying. "Students need to understand the harm their words can cause. My dad was having none of it." "Educating and humiliating are two different things," he said in that calm but firm voice he used when I was in trouble as a kid. "You called my daughter a bigot for expressing a personal belief. That's not teaching, that's bullying." The district people looked uncomfortable. One of them, this lady in a sharp suit, kept taking notes and asking questions about the school's policies on classroom conduct. Update. "You guys are asking great questions about the legal stuff. So here's the deal. My dad and I decided to lawyer. Up after that meeting went nowhere. The school basically tried to sweep it under the rug at first. They offered me a different class and called it good, but we weren't having it. My attorney is this no-nonsense woman who specializes in educational discrimination cases. When she heard the recording, she got this look in her eyes like a shark smelling blood in the water. Anyone want to know what happened when we actually filed the lawsuit? Long story short, the school's first response was damage control. They offered me a full refund for the class, a written apology, and some credits toward other courses. "This should resolve everything," the district representative said with this fake smile. My dad looked at me and I shook my head. It wasn't about the money or even the class anymore. It was about the principle of the thing. That's when we brought in the lawyer. Sarah Martinez was recommended by a family friend, and man, she was exactly what we needed. Former prosecutor, tough as nails, with a track record of winning cases against educational institutions. "This is textbook harassment based on personal beliefs," she told us during our first meeting. "The recording is clear evidence of discriminatory treatment in an educational setting." She filed a formal lawsuit against both Ms. Peterson and the school district for violation of my civil rights, harassment, and creating a hostile educational environment. The local news picked it up, and suddenly everyone was talking about it. My phone started blowing up with messages from classmates, some supporting me, others not so much. Facebook was a nightmare. Twitter was worse. But for every person calling me names, there were 2 or 3 saying they'd experienced similar situations. The school tried to settle out of court pretty quickly once the media attention ramped up. Their lawyers kept calling Sarah with increasingly desperate offers. First 50,000, then 75, then 6 figures. "They're scared," Sarah explained. "If this goes to trial, it sets a precedent. Other students might come forward with similar cases." The whole process took about 6 weeks. During that time, I found out I wasn't the only student Ms. Peterson had targeted. 3 other kids from previous semesters came forward with their own stories. One guy said she'd made fun of his religious beliefs in front of the whole class. Another girl said Ms. Peterson had given her failing grades after she disagreed with something during a discussion. The school's investigation revealed a pattern of behavior. Apparently, Ms. Peterson had multiple complaints filed against her over the years, but somehow they'd all been swept under the rug or dismissed. When we finally reached a settlement, it was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. 6 figures, plus the school had to implement new policies about classroom conduct and teacher training. Ms. Peterson was terminated immediately. But the weirdest part? 2 weeks after everything was finalized, she showed up at my apartment. Was just chilling on a Tuesday evening, binge-watching Netflix and eating leftover Pizza Hut, when someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and nearly choked on my pepperoni slice. It was Ms. Peterson, and she looked terrible, like really terrible. Her hair was messy, she had dark circles under her eyes, and she was crying. "Please," she said when I cracked the door open. "I just need 5 minutes to apologize." Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face. But honestly, she looked so broken that I felt kind of bad for her. "I ruined my own life," she said, standing there on my doorstep like a sad wet cat. "I lost my job, my reputation, everything. And for what? Because I couldn't handle a student having a different opinion than mine." She went on for about 10 minutes, apologizing and crying and saying how she'd been under stress and had let her personal politics cloud her professional judgment. She asked if there was anything she could do to make things right. I listened to the whole thing, and honestly, I felt sorry for her. But I also remembered how humiliated and small she'd made me feel in front of everyone. "I appreciate the apology," I told her, "but you can't undo what happened. You had power over me in that classroom, and you used it to hurt me." She nodded and cried some more, then finally left. After she was gone, I sat there thinking about everything that had happened. The settlement money was sitting in my bank account, more cash than I knew what to do with. At first, I thought about using it for school, maybe transferring to a 4-year university. But then I remembered all those other students who'd reached out to me, sharing their own stories of being silenced or humiliated in classrooms. Kids who didn't have the resources or support to fight back like I did. That's when I got the idea. I used the settlement money to start a nonprofit organization called Student Voice Advocates. The whole mission is to provide legal support and resources for students who face discrimination or harassment for their personal beliefs in educational settings. We set up a hotline, a website with resources, and a network of volunteer attorneys who take cases pro bono. Within 6 months, we'd helped dozens of students across the state. The best part? We got funding from some major donors who believed in what we were doing. Turns out, there are a lot of people who think students shouldn't be punished for having different opinions. Ms. Peterson never found another teaching job, as far as I know. Last I heard, she was working retail somewhere across town. I don't take any joy in that. Honestly, I hope she learned something from the whole experience. But me? I'm doing great. I transferred to State University with a full scholarship, majoring in communications with a focus on advocacy and public policy. The nonprofit is thriving, and we've helped establish new student rights policies at schools across 3 states. My dad always said that sometimes the worst things that happen to you end up being the best things in disguise. I never really understood what he meant until all this went down. Getting humiliated in that classroom was one of the worst experiences of my life. But it led me to find my voice, stand up for myself, and ultimately help other students who are going through the same thing. These days, when I speak at schools about student rights, I always tell kids the same thing. Your beliefs matter, your voice matters, and you don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone has authority over you. Update. Wow, this story really resonated with so many of you. I'm getting hundreds of messages from students who've had similar experiences. Some of you are asking about getting help from student voice advocates. Yes, we're still operating and growing every day. Others want to know if Ms. Peterson ever tried to contact me again. Nope, that doorstep apology was the last I heard from her. But here's what I really want to know from everyone reading this. Have you ever had a teacher or professor make you feel ashamed for your personal beliefs? Because based on these responses, this problem is way bigger than I ever imagined. The organization now has chapters in 12 states, and we've helped over 200 students navigate situations where their rights were violated. We work with everyone: conservative kids, liberal kids, religious students, atheists, basically anyone who's been targeted for their personal beliefs in an educational setting. Sometimes people ask me if I regret taking that gender studies class in the first place. Honestly, not for a second. If I hadn't been in that room that day, I never would have found my purpose. And that recording on my phone? It's still there, backed up in about 5 different places. Not because I want to relive that awful day, but because it reminds me that sometimes standing up for yourself, even when you're scared, even when everyone's against you, can change everything. Life's funny like that. One terrible morning can turn into the best thing that ever happened to you if you're brave enough to fight back.